Imagine a snowbound English manor, where the elite gather under a veil of polished smiles and hidden daggers. What if one sip of medicine turns a powerful tycoon's evening into his last breath? Who among the charming fiancé, the indebted son, the scorned wife, or the shady business partner wields the poison of revenge? In this lost Agatha Christie-style tale, the brilliant Hercule Poirot arrives to untangle a web of lies spun from a forgotten affair and a family's dark past. As alibis crumble and secrets spill, will justice prevail, or will the killer slip away? Dive into Miss Marple unravels a web of lies in high society, a classic whodunit of betrayal, motive, and masterful deduction that keeps you guessing until the shocking reveal. Stay tuned for the full mystery. Chapter 1. The Glitter of High Society. In the late summer of 1928, the grand estate of Haverford Hall gleamed under the soft English sunlight, its ivy-clad towers and manicured lawns a testament to centuries of wealth and refinement. Nestled in the heart of St. Mary Mead's neighbouring countryside, the hall was the seat of the illustrious Haverford family, whose annual gala drew the cream of society like moths to a flame. The air was thick with the scent of roses and anticipation, for this year's gathering promised to be the most splendid yet a celebration of Lady Eleanor, Haverford's engagement to the dashing, if enigmatic, Captain Julian Warrender. The ballroom, aglow with chandeliers, hummed with the chatter of guests, aristocrats in tailored evening wear, debutantes in silks that shimmered like moonlight, and a scattering of local gentry eager to bask in the Haverford's reflected glory. Beneath the polished surface, however, currents of unease rippled, whispers of financial strain, a contested inheritance, and old grudges floated among the clinking glasses and strains of the orchestra. It was precisely the sort of gathering where secrets festered, and Miss Jane Marple, seated quietly in a corner with her knitting, observed it all with her deceptively mild gaze. Miss Marple had not been invited for her social standing, though. Her presence was welcomed by the villagers' matrons, who valued her quiet wisdom. She was there at the behest of her old friend, Mrs. Clara Bantry, whose husband, Colonel Bantry, was a distant cousin of the Haverfords. "Jane, you simply must." "Come," Clara had insisted. "It's all so grand, but something feels off. You'll see what I mean." Miss Marple, with her knack for noticing what others overlooked, had agreed, her curiosity piqued by Clara's vague unease. From her vantage point near a potted fern, Miss Marple's eyes darted over the crowd. There was Lady Eleanor, radiant, in a gown of emerald satin, her laughter a touch too bright as she clung to Captain Warrender's arm. The captain, tall and bronzed from years abroad, exuded charm, but his smile seemed to Miss Marple like a mask, carefully crafted. Nearby, Sir Reginald Haverford, Eleanor's father, stood stiffly, his face a map of worry beneath his forced geniality. His wife, Lady Margaret, flitted among the guests, her diamond necklace catching the light, though her eyes betrayed a nervous flicker. Among the other notables were Mr. Lionel Cresswell, a solicitor with a sharp nose and sharper ambitions, who hovered near Sir Reginald like a vulture circling a wounded beast. Miss Diana Trent, Eleanor's cousin, wore a brittle smile, her beauty marred by a tightness around her mouth, as if she nursed a private grievance. And then there was Dr. Alistair Gray, the family physician, whose quiet demeanour and watchful eyes suggested he knew more of Haverford Hall's secrets than he let on. Miss Marple's needles clicked rhythmically, a soothing counterpoint to the orchestra's waltz. To the casual observer, she was merely an elderly spinster, her white hair neatly pinned, her black lace dress a relic of Edwardian propriety. But her mind was as sharp as the needles in her hands, cataloguing every glance, every whispered exchange. She noted, for instance, the way Captain Warrender's hand lingered on Eleanor's arm, possessive yet detached, and how Diana Trent's eyes followed them, her lips thinning. She saw, too, the brief, tense exchange between Sir Reginald and Mr. Cresswell near the French doors, their voices low but heated. As the clock struck 10, the party reached its zenith. The guests spilled onto the terrace, where lanterns cast a golden glow over the gardens. Miss Marple remained inside, her knitting paused as she sipped her tea. It was then that Clara Bantry hurried to her side, her face pale beneath her rouge. "Jane," she whispered, clutching Miss Marple's arm, "something dreadful has happened. Eleanor She's vanished. They've searched the house, the gardens, everywhere. She's simply gone." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, though her expression remained serene. "Vanished, you say?" she murmured, setting her knitting aside. "How very interesting. Tell me, Clara, when was she last seen, and by whom?" Clara, flustered, recounted the details. Eleanor had been dancing with Captain Warrender at 9:30, radiant and laughing. Then she had excused herself to fetch a shawl from her room, promising to return. Warrender claimed to have waited on the terrace, but no one had seen Eleanor since. The servants were in a tizzy, and Sir Reginald was on the verge of summoning the police. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, a sign of deep thought. "A shawl at 9:30, she said softly. "And yet the evening is warm. Curious, is it not?" She rose, her movements deliberate, and adjusted her shawl. "I think, Clara, we must take a little walk. There is much to observe, and I suspect the truth lies in the smallest details." As they moved toward the terrace, Miss Marple's mind was already at work, sifting through the evening's impressions. A disappearance at Haverford Hall, amidst such glittering company, was no mere accident. There was a pattern here, she felt certain, woven into the polite smiles and careful words of the guests, and Miss Jane Marple, with her unassuming air and razor-sharp mind, was determined to unravel it. Chapter 2. The Shadow of Absence, the Terrace of Haverford Hall. Bathed in the soft glow of lanterns was a scene of controlled chaos. Guests milled about, their earlier gaiety replaced by murmurs of concern, while servants darted to and fro, their faces taut with worry. The warm August night seemed to carry a chill now, as if Lady Eleanor's disappearance had cast a pall over the festivities. Miss Jane Marple stood at the edge of the terrace, her small figure almost invisible against the backdrop of climbing roses, her keen eyes scanning the crowd. Mrs. Clara Bantry hovered at her side, wringing her hands. "Jane, it's dreadful," she whispered. "Sir Reginald is beside himself, and Lady Margaret looks as if she might faint. What could have happened to Eleanor? She was the belle of the ball not an hour ago." Miss Marple's expression remained serene, though her mind was racing. "We must not leap to conclusions, Clara," she said gently. "A young lady does not vanish without reason. Let us begin with what we know. You say she was last seen at 9:30, going to fetch a shawl." Clara nodded vigorously. "Yes, Captain Warrender confirmed it. He said she left him on the terrace and promised to return in a moment. But she never did." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. "A shawl in this warmth," she murmured, her tone thoughtful. "And Captain Warrender waited alone, did he? Interesting." She turned her gaze to the French doors leading into the ballroom, where Sir Reginald Haverford was now in heated discussion with Mr. Lionel Cresswell, the solicitor. Their voices, though low, carried an edge of urgency. "Come, Clara," Miss Marple said, adjusting her shawl. "Let us see what the house can tell us." They entered the grand hall, where the polished marble floor reflected the flickering light of a chandelier. A wide staircase swept upward to the private quarters, and Miss Marple, with surprising agility for her years, ascended it, Clara trailing behind. At the top, they were met by Mrs. Hodges, the housekeeper, a stout woman whose usual composure was fraying at the edges. "Oh, Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple," Mrs. Hodges said, her voice trembling. "We've searched Lady Eleanor's room, the library, the conservatory, everywhere. There's no sign of her. Her shawl is still on the chair in her room, just where she left it." Miss Marple's eyes brightened at this. Indeed, then she did not fetch it after all. "May I see her room, Mrs. Hodges?" The housekeeper led them to a spacious bedroom adorned with delicate floral wallpaper and heavy velvet drapes. A four-poster bed dominated the space, its counterpane undisturbed. On an armchair by the window lay a cream-coloured shawl, folded neatly. Miss Marple approached it, her fingers brushing the soft fabric. "This is the shawl she meant to fetch?" she asked. "Yes, miss," Mrs. Hodges replied. "She always wore it in the evenings, said it was her favourite." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze sweeping the room. She noted the open wardrobe, where gowns hung in perfect order, and a vanity table cluttered with silver-backed brushes and a small bottle of perfume. A single hairpin lay on the floor near the door, its tortoiseshell gleam catching her eye. She bent to pick it up, turning it over in her fingers. "Curious," she murmured, "a hairpin out of place in such a tidy room." Clara frowned. "What does it mean, Jane?" "Perhaps nothing," Miss Marple said lightly, slipping the hairpin into her reticule. "Or perhaps everything. We shall see." They returned downstairs, where Sir Reginald had now gathered a small group in the library. Lady Margaret, Captain Warrender, Miss Diana Trent, Dr. Alistair Gray, and Mr. Cresswell. The air was thick with tension, and Miss Marple's arrival drew curious glances. Sir Reginald, his face flushed with agitation, turned to her. "Miss Marple, Clara says you have a knack for noticing things. Have you any thoughts on this wretched business?" Miss Marple inclined her head modestly. "I am but an observer, Sir Reginald. However, I should like to ask a few questions, if I may. Captain Warrender, you were with Lady Eleanor at 9:30. Did she seem distressed in any way?" Captain Warrender, his dark eyes guarded, shook his head. "Not at all. She was in high spirits, laughing and dancing. She said she felt a chill and went to fetch her shawl. I waited on the terrace, but after 10 minutes I grew concerned and alerted the staff." Miss Marple's eyes flickered to Diana Trent, whose hands were clasped tightly in her lap. "And you, Miss Trent, did you see your cousin after she left the terrace?" Diana's lips tightened, and she hesitated before answering. "No, I was in the ballroom, speaking with Dr. Gray. I didn't see her after the dancing began." Dr. Gray nodded in confirmation, his expression unreadable. "We were discussing a medical journal, I believe. It was around 9:15. Miss Marple turned to Lady Margaret, whose hands trembled as she clutched a handkerchief. "And you, Lady Margaret? When did you last see your daughter?" Lady Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. "Just before 9, in the drawing-room. She seemed happy." "Oh, where could she be?" Miss Marple's gaze softened, but her mind was sharp. She noted the precise times given, the slight hesitations, the way Mr. Cresswell's eyes darted towards Sir Reginald as if expecting a cue. "Thank you all," she said. "It is a puzzle, but puzzles have solutions. I should like to speak with the servants next, if you please." As the group dispersed, Miss Marple lingered in the library, her eyes falling on a small silver cigarette case on a side table. It was engraved with the initials J.W., presumably Captain Warrender's. She opened it, finding it empty save for a faint scent of tobacco and something else, sharp and chemical. Her brow furrowed, but she said nothing, closing the case with a soft click. Outside, the night deepened, and the search for Lady Eleanor continued. But Miss Marple, with her quiet certainty, knew that the truth lay not in the gardens or the darkened corridors of Haverford Hall, but in the contradictions and secrets of those who remained. She would watch and listen and wait for the truth, like a dropped stitch, would soon unravel. Chapter 3. The arrival of Inside the Library at Haverford Hall, with its towering bookshelves and heavy velvet curtains, seemed to absorb the tension of the night, its silence broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire in the hearth. Miss Jane Marple sat in a high-backed chair, her knitting resting in her lap, her eyes bright and alert despite the late hour. The servants had been summoned, and one by one they filed in, their faces a mixture of apprehension and deference. Miss Marple, with her unassuming air, put them at ease. But her questions were as precise as a surgeon's scalpel. Mrs. Clara Bantry stood by the fireplace, her earlier agitation tempered by Miss Marple's calm presence. "Jane, do you really think the servants know something?" she whispered as the butler, Mr. Parsons, entered, his stiff posture betraying a lifetime of service. "One never knows where the truth hides." "Clara," Miss Marple replied softly, her needles clicking once, before she set them aside. "But people, even the most discreet, cannot help but see and hear. Let us listen." Mr. Parsons, a man of late middle age with a face like weathered oak, stood before them, his hands clasped behind his back. "Miss Marple, I assure you, the staff are as baffled as anyone," he began, his voice steady but strained. "Lady Eleanor was in fine spirits all evening. I saw her myself at 9 o'clock, passing through the hall toward the terrace." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. 9 o'clock, you say? And did she speak to anyone, Mr. Parsons, or seem in any way out of sorts? The butler hesitated, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "She did pause to speak with Miss Trent, ma'am. It was brief, and I couldn't hear the words, but Miss Trent seemed displeased. Lady Eleanor then went out to the terrace, where Captain Warrender was waiting." Miss Marple nodded, filing away the detail. "And after that, did anyone else see her?" Parsons shook his head. "Not that I know of, ma'am. The footmen were busy with the guests, and the maids were in the kitchens or upstairs. I myself was overseeing the wine service until the alarm was raised at 10. Next came Sarah, a young housemaid with wide eyes and a nervous habit of twisting her apron. Miss Marple's gentle tone coaxed her to speak. "I was tidying the upstairs corridor, miss," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I saw Lady Eleanor come up to her room at 9:30, just as the captain said. She went in, but she came out again almost at once, without her shawl. I thought it odd, as she'd said she was cold." Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. "Without her shawl, you say? And did she go back downstairs?" Sarah nodded. "Yes, miss, toward the back staircase, not the main one. I thought she might be going to the conservatory or the service wing, but I didn't follow. I had my duties. The back staircase." Miss Marple's mind seized on the detail, picturing the layout of Haverford Hall. The back staircase led to less frequented parts of the house, the conservatory, the servants' quarters, and a side door to the gardens. An unusual choice for a lady in evening dress. "Thank you, Sarah," she said kindly. "You've been most helpful." As the servants departed, Miss Marple turned to Clara. The back staircase, Clara. Why would Lady Eleanor choose such a route unless she wished to avoid being seen? And Miss Trent's conversation with Hertha is something there, I feel certain. Clara's eyes widened. Do you think Diana had something to do with it? They've always been rivals. You know Lenor's engagement to Captain Warrender caused quite a stir. Diana's been in love with him for years, or so the village gossip goes. Miss Marple's lips twitched in a faint smile. Gossip, Clara, is like a badly knitted scarf full of holes, but useful for its threads. We must be cautious, but we must also follow where the threads lead. She rose, her movements deliberate, and requested to see the back staircase. Clara led her through a maze of corridors to a narrow, dimly lit stairwell, its walls lined with faded wallpaper. At the foot of the stairs, near the door to the conservatory, Miss Marple paused. A small scrap of green fabric, no larger than a postage stamp, lay caught in the hinge of the door. She bent to retrieve it, her fingers careful not to tear it further. It matched the emerald satin of Lady Eleanor's gown. "Clara," Miss Marple said, holding up the scrap. "This suggests Lady Eleanor passed this way. But why the conservatory, and why so secretly? We must look there next." The conservatory was a glass-walled haven filled with exotic plants and the heavy scent of jasmine. Moonlight streamed through the panes, casting eerie shadows. Miss Marple moved slowly, her eyes scanning the tiled floor and wicker furniture. Near a cluster of ferns, she stopped, her gaze fixed on a single drop of red on the white tiles. It was small, almost invisible, but unmistakable blood. Clara gasped. "Jane, is that—" "It may be," Miss Marple said quietly, her voice steady. "Or it may be something else. Spilled cordial, perhaps. But we must not assume. We must observe." She knelt, examining the spot. The drop was fresh, not yet congealed, suggesting it had fallen within the past hour. Nearby, a small brass key lay half hidden beneath a potted palm. Miss Marple picked it up, noting its intricate design. "This does not look like a house key," she murmured. "Perhaps it belongs to a desk or a private cabinet." As they returned to the library, Miss Marple's mind was a whirl of connections. The hairpin in Eleanor's room, the scrap of fabric, the drop of blood. The mysterious caul with threads in a tapestry she was beginning to discern. But the pattern was not yet clear, and she knew the key to unravelling it lay in the people of Haverford Hall, their motives and their lies. Sir Reginald entered, his face haggard. "Miss Marple, the police have been called. Inspector Davies will be here by morning. But I beg you, if you know anything, I know only that we must." "Be patient, Sir Reginald," Miss Marple said gently. "The truth is like a shy creature, reveals itself only when we are quiet and watchful." As the night wore on, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her needles clicking in a rhythm that belied the storm of thoughts within her. Lady Eleanor's disappearance was no accident, she was certain, and somewhere among the glittering guests and shadowed corridors, the truth waited to be found. Chapter 4. The Art of Asking Questions. The clock in the library of Haverford Hall chimed midnight, its sombre tones echoing through the hushed room. The guests had been asked to remain on the premises, and an air of unease settled over the grand estate like a fog. Miss Jane Marple sat near the fire, her knitting a quiet companion, though her hands were still as she observed the gathered company. Sir Reginald Haverford paced by the window, his face etched with worry, while Lady Margaret sat rigidly, her handkerchief crumpled in her fist. Captain Julian Warrender leaned against the mantel, his expression one of studied calm, though his fingers drummed faintly on the polished wood. Miss Diana Trent and Dr. Alistair Gray sat apart, each lost in their own thoughts, while Mr. Lionel Cresswell, the solicitor, scribbled notes in a small leather-bound book. Mrs. Clara Bantry, hovering near Miss Marple, whispered Jane, "The police won't arrive until dawn. Whatever shall we do until then? Poor Eleanor, every moment feels like an eternity." Miss Marple's eyes, sharp and clear, met Clara's. "We shall do what is most useful. Clara, we shall talk to people. The truth is often found in what is said and what is not said." She rose, her small frame belying the authority in her voice. "Sir Reginald, with your permission, I should like to speak with each of your guests in turn. A few questions, nothing more, to clarify the events of the evening." Sir Reginald, weary but desperate, nodded. "Anything, Miss Marple, if it helps find my daughter." Miss Marple began with Captain Warrender, inviting him to sit opposite her. His charm was undiminished, but there was a wariness in his dark eyes. "Captain," she began, her tone gentle but probing, "you were the last to see Lady Eleanor, I believe. Can you describe her mood as she left you on the terrace?" Warrender's smile was tight. "She was happy, Miss Marple. We'd been dancing, and she was laughing about a silly story I told her, a memory from my days in India. She said she felt a chill and went to fetch her shawl. I waited, as I told you, but she didn't return." Miss Marple tilted her head, her gaze steady. "And during that wait, Captain, did anyone join you on the terrace? Or did you, perhaps, step away yourself?" A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly masked. "No one joined me. I stood by the balustrade, smoking a cigarette. I didn't leave until I grew worried and went to find Parsons." Miss Marple nodded, her fingers brushing the silver cigarette case she had found earlier, now tucked in her reticule beside the hairpin and the brass key. "A cigarette, you say? And yet your case was empty when I found it in the library. Curious, is it not?" Warrender's jaw tightened. "I must have misplaced it. I have another, you see." "Of course," Miss Marple said mildly, dismissing him with a nod. She turned next to Miss Diana Trent, whose pale face and clenched hands suggested a storm of emotion beneath her composure. "Miss Trent, Mr. Parsons mentioned a conversation between you and Lady Eleanor near the hall at 9 o'clock. May I ask what you discussed?" Diana's eyes darted to the side, then back to Miss Marple. "It was nothing important. A family matter about the guest list for the wedding. Eleanor was distracted, and I was annoyed. We parted quickly." Miss Marple's expression remained kindly, but her question was sharp. "Distracted, you say? In what way?" Diana hesitated, her fingers twisting a pearl bracelet. She seemed preoccupied, as if something was on her mind. "I thought it was just nerves about the engagement. She's always been impulsive." Miss Marple noted the bitterness in Diana's tone, though she said nothing, merely thanking her and moving on to Dr. Gray. The physician's calm demeanour intrigued her. He seemed less rattled than the others. "Dr. Gray," she began, "you were with Miss Trent in the ballroom at 9:15, discussing a medical journal. Did you notice anything unusual about the other guests?" Dr. Gray's eyes met hers, steady and thoughtful. I'm afraid I was absorbed in our conversation, Miss Marpell. The ballroom was crowded, but I did see Sir Reginald speaking with Mr. Cresswell near the French doors. They seemed agitated. Miss Marple's interest quickened. Agitated? You say, in what way? A raised voice, perhaps, or a gesture. It was fleeting, but I recall Sir Reginald looking rather pale. Finally, she turned to Mr. Cresswell, whose sharp features were drawn tight with irritation. Mr. Cresswell, you and Sir Reginald were seen in discussion several times this evening. Might I ask what you were speaking of? Cresswell's pen paused, and he looked up, his tone clipped. Business matters, Miss Marple. The Haverford estate is complex, and Sir Reginald sought my advice on certain financial arrangements. It's hardly relevant to Eleanor's disappearance. Miss Marple's smile was disarming. Perhaps not, but it is curious that such urgent business was conducted during a gala. Was Lady Eleanor aware of these arrangements? Cresswell's eyes narrowed, but he answered smoothly. She may have been. Sir Reginald often confided in her, but I assure you it was routine. As the interviews concluded, Miss Marple returned to her chair, her mind a whirl of details. The empty cigarette case with its faint chemical scent, the scrap of Eleanor's gown, the drop of blood in the conservatory, the brass key. And now these conflicting accounts, each was a piece of the puzzle. Warrender's cigarette case contradicted his claim of smoking. Diana's bitterness hinted at deeper motives. Dr. Gray's observation of Sir Reginald's agitation suggested financial strain. And Cresswell's evasiveness was telling Clara. Watching her friend, whispered, Jane, have you learned anything? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. Oh yes, Clara, I have learned that people are rarely what they seem, and that the truth is like a knot tightly tied, but not impossible to undo. We must look closer at this back staircase and the conservatory, and I think, perhaps, a word with Lady Margaret alone might be illuminating. As the fire crackled and the night grew deeper, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her needles moving in time with her thoughts. The disappearance of Lady Eleanor was no simple matter, and the web of lies at Haverford Hall was beginning to fray under her gentle, relentless scrutiny. Chapter 5. The red herrings, the early hours of the morning cast a ghostly pallor over Haverford Hall. The grandeur of its rooms dimmed by the weight of uncertainty. The guests, confined to the drawing-room under Sir Reginald's anxious decree, whispered among themselves, their faces drawn with fatigue and suspicion. Miss Jane Marple, however, showed no sign of weariness. She sat in a corner of the library, her knitting needles paused, her sharp eyes darting between the small objects she had collected, a tortoiseshell hairpin, a scrap of emerald satin, a brass key, and the silver cigarette case with its faint chemical scent. Each was a clue, but the pattern they formed remained elusive. Mrs. Clara Bantry, her nerves frayed, approached Miss Marple with a cup of tea. Jane, the police will be here soon, but I can't bear this waiting. Everyone's pointing fingers, and Captain Warrender seems the obvious culprit. He was the last to see Eleanor, after all. Miss Marple accepted the tea with a nod, her expression thoughtful. The obvious, Clara, is often a distraction. Captain Warrender may be involved, but we must not be led astray by assumptions. In my experience, the truth hides behind the most convenient stories. As if on cue, a commotion erupted from the drawing-room. Raised voices carried through the heavy oak doors, and Miss Marple, with Clara in tow, hurried to investigate. They found Captain Warrender at the centre of a heated exchange with Miss Diana Trent, whose face was flushed with anger. You know more than you're letting on, Julian, Diana cried, her voice sharp. Eleanor was upset when she left you. What did you say to her? Warrender's jaw tightened, but his tone remained cool. I've told you, Diana, she was perfectly happy. You're letting jealousy cloud your judgment. The accusation hung in the air, and the other guests, Lady Margaret, Dr. Gray, and Mr. Cresswell, watched with varying degrees of discomfort. Sir Reginald stepped forward, his voice strained. Enough. This bickering won't find my daughter. Captain Warrender, explain yourself properly, or I'll have no choice but to suspect you. Miss Marple, standing quietly by the door, noted the tension in Warrender's posture, the way his hand twitched toward his pocket, as if seeking the absent cigarette case. She stepped forward, her voice gentle but commanding attention. If I may, Sir Reginald, I believe we might all benefit from a clearer picture of the evening. Captain Warrender, you mentioned smoking a cigarette on the terrace while waiting for Lady Eleanor. At what time did you light it? Precisely. Warrender blinked, caught off guard. Why, I suppose it was just after she left, say, or so. I didn't check my watch. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. And yet, your cigarette case, which I found in the library, was empty. Had you perhaps smoked your last one earlier? A murmur ran through the room. Warrender's composure faltered for a moment. I must have used my spare case. I keep another in my room. Of course, Miss Marple said smoothly, turning to Diana. Miss Trent, you spoke with Lady Eleanor at 9 o'clock, near the hall. You mentioned a family matter. Was it perhaps related to Captain Warrender? Diana's eyes widened, and she hesitated. It was about the wedding plans, as I said. Eleanor was being careless, as usual, and I told her so. She brushed me off, and went to the terrace. Miss Marple nodded, her gaze shifting to Lady Margaret, who sat pale and silent. Lady Margaret, you saw your daughter before 9, in the drawing-room. Did she mention any concerns about her engagement, or perhaps about Captain Warrender? Lady Margaret's hands trembled, and she shook her head. No, she was delighted. She spoke of the future, of travelling with Julian. She was so happy. Her voice broke, and she pressed her handkerchief to her lips. Miss Marple's expression softened, but her mind was relentless. The inconsistencies were piling up. Warrender's empty cigarette case, Diana's evasiveness, and the curious fact that Eleanor had not taken her shawl despite claiming to need it. The scrap of her gown in the conservatory door, the drop of blood, and the brass key suggested a path she had taken. But why? And where was she now? As the group dispersed, Miss Marple drew Clara aside. Clara, I should like to visit the conservatory again. That drop of blood troubles me, and the key may hold answers. Will you fetch Dr. Gray? His expertise might be useful. They returned to the conservatory, where the moonlight still cast long shadows across the tiled floor. Dr. Gray, summoned reluctantly, examined the drop of blood Miss Marple had found earlier. It's fresh, certainly, he said, his voice measured. No more than a few hours old. It could be from a minor injury, a cut, perhaps, but it's too small to suggest anything graver. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes on the brass key in her hand, and this key Dr. Grayed as it looked familiar, perhaps to a medicine cabinet or a private drawer. Dr. Gray frowned, studying it. It's not one I recognize, but it could belong to a desk or a small safe. The Haverfords have many such locks in the study or the estate office. Miss Marple tucked the key away, her mind racing. The conservatory, with its secluded entrance via the back staircase, was a place of secrets. The blood, the fabric, the Cule pointed to Eleanor's presence here, but the question remained, Had she left willingly, or was she taken? As they returned to the library, a young footman approached, his face pale. Miss Marple. Mum, I found something in the garden near the conservatory door. I thought you should see it. He held out a small gold locket, its chain broken, engraved with the initials E.H. Miss Marple took it carefully, her heart quickening. Thank you, Thomas. This is most important. Where exactly did you find it? By the rose trellis. Ma'am, just outside the conservatory. It was half buried in the soil, like it was dropped in a hurry. Clara gasped. Jane, that's Eleanor's locket. She never took it off. Oh, this is dreadful. Miss Marple's expression remained calm, but her mind was alight. The locket, the blood, the fabric all were threads in a tightening web. We are getting closer, Clara, she said softly, but we must tread carefully. Someone in this house knows more than they are telling, and I suspect they are watching us as closely as we are watching them. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her needles clicking in a steady rhythm. The red herrings were Ender's charm, Diana's jealousy. The financial whispers were distractions, but they were also clues. The truth was near, and Miss Marple was determined to find it before the police arrived to muddy the waters. Chapter 6. A clue in detail. The first rays of dawn filtered through the heavy drapes of Haverford Hall, casting a pale light over the library where Miss Jane Marple sat, her knitting a quiet sentinel by her side. The house had settled into an uneasy silence, the guests confined to their rooms or the drawing-room, awaiting the arrival of Inspector Davies. Miss Marple, however, was not content to wait. The clues she had gathered, the tortoiseshell hairpin, the scrap of emerald satin, the brass key, the silver cigarette case, the drop of blood, and now the gold locket with its broken chain formed a constellation of facts, and she was determined to discern their pattern. Mrs. Clara Bantry, ever loyal, sat nearby, her eyes heavy with fatigue but bright with curiosity. Jane, that locket's proof something terrible has happened, isn't it? Poor Eleanor, out there in the garden, alone. Miss Marple's gaze softened, but her voice was firm. We must not assume too much, Clara. The locket tells. Us Lady Eleanor was near the conservatory, perhaps in haste or distress, but it does not yet tell us her fate. Let us examine it closely. She held the locket to the light, noting its delicate engraving and the broken clasp, which suggested it had been torn from Eleanor's neck. Inside, a small photograph of a young man, not Captain Warrender, but someone older, with a stern expression, stared back. Miss Marple's brow furrowed. Curious, she murmured. Clara, do you know this man? Clara peered at the photograph, her brow creasing. I'm not certain, Jane, but he looks rather like Sir Reginald's late brother, Charles Haverford. He died some years ago, abroad. Eleanor was very fond of him, I believe. Miss Marple nodded, slipping the locket into her reticule alongside her other finds. The photograph added a new thread to the tapestry, a connection to the past, perhaps a motive rooted in family history. Her thoughts turned to the brass key, which Dr. Gray had suggested might belong to a desk or safe. Clara, I think a visit to the estate office might be in order. If this key unlocks something, it may tell us what Lady Eleanor was seeking. They made their way to the estate office, a small, cluttered room off the main hall, its walls lined with ledgers and maps of the Haverford lands. A heavy oak desk stood at the centre, its surface strewn with papers and a locked drawer. Miss Marple produced the brass key and, with a gentle click, unlocked the drawer. Inside was a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon, a small vial of clear liquid, and a ledger marked private. Clara's eyes widened. "Jane, what is all this?" Miss Marple's fingers moved deftly, untying the letters. They were addressed to Sir Reginald, written in a hurried hand, and bore the signature of Charles Haverford. She scanned one briefly, her lips pursing. "These are from Sir Reginald's brother, written years ago. They speak of a disagreement, a financial matter, it seems. Charles accuses Sir Reginald of mismanaging the estate and threatens to expose him." Clara gasped. Could this be why Eleanor disappeared? Did she find these letters? "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone thoughtful. She examined the vial, holding it to the light. It was unlabeled, but its faint chemical scent matched that of Captain Warrender's cigarette case. "This, Clara, is most interesting. It suggests a connection we have not yet explored." She opened the ledger, her eyes scanning columns of figures. The entries detailed loans and debts, many marked as urgent, with recent annotations in Sir Reginald's hand. One entry, dated a week prior, noted a large sum paid to L.C. like Lionel Cresswell, the solicitor. Miss Marple's mind raced. Financial strain, old family secrets, and a mysterious vial wart had Eleanor stumbled upon. As they left the office, Miss Marple's attention was drawn to a small detail, a smudge of dirt on the carpet near the door, fresh and slightly damp, as if someone had entered recently from the garden. She knelt to examine it, noting a faint imprint of a heel too small for a man's shoe, too large for a child's. "Clara," she said softly, "someone was here tonight, after the rain stopped at 8. This dirt is from the garden path." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. "Eleanor, or someone who wished to be unseen," Miss Marple replied. She straightened, her mind weaving the clues together. The locket in the garden, the blood in the conservatory, the letters and vial in the desk-all, pointed to a deliberate act, not a random disappearance, but whose hand had guided it. They returned to the library, where Miss Marple requested a private word with Lady Margaret. The older woman, pale and fragile, sat with her hands clasped tightly. "Lady Margaret," Miss Marple began gently, "I found a locket belonging to Eleanor, with a photograph of your late brother-in-law, Charles. Was she particularly close to him?" Lady Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Yes, she adored him. Charles was kinder than Reginald, more attentive to her as a child. When he died, Eleanor was heartbroken. She wore that locket always, as a keepsake. And did she ever speak of family matters, perhaps disagreements between Charles and Sir Reginald? Lady Margaret hesitated, then nodded. She once mentioned finding old letters in the attic, years ago. She said they upset her, but she wouldn't tell me why. I thought it was childish sentimentality. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Thank you, Lady Margaret. You have been most helpful." As Lady Margaret left, Clara whispered, "Jane, what does it mean? Letters? A vial? A locket? How do they fit?" Miss Marple's needles resumed their clicking, a steady rhythm against the chaos of the night. "They are pieces, Clara, of a puzzle that is beginning to take shape. Lady Eleanor found something perhaps in those letters that threatened someone in this house. The vial, the blood, the locket all suggest a struggle or a plan. We must now watch for the smallest inconsistency, for it will lead us to the truth." Outside, the first sounds of an approaching motor car signalled the arrival of Inspector Davies. But Miss Marple, with her quiet certainty, knew that the key to the mystery lay not in police procedures. but in the subtle contradictions of human nature, which she was uniquely equipped to unravel. Chapter 7. More lies surfaced. The arrival of Inspector Davies at Haverford Hall brought a bustle of officialdom that contrasted sharply with the quiet intensity of Miss Jane Marple's investigation. The inspector, a stout man with a bristling moustache and a nonsense air, took charge at once, setting up in the drawing-room to interview the guests and servants. Yet Miss Marple, seated unobtrusively in the library with her knitting, knew that the truth would not be found in bluster or procedure, but in the delicate unravelling of human secrets. The clues she had gathered, the hairpin, the scrap of satin, the brass key, the cigarette case, the drop of blood, the locket, and the letters from the estate office were threads in a web of lies, and she sensed that web was beginning to fray. Mrs. Clara Bantry, hovering near Miss Marple, whispered Jane, "The inspector seems very thorough, but I fear he'll overlook something. He's already questioning Captain Warrender again, and I heard him mention a search of the grounds." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her eyes fixed on the flickering fire. "Inspector Davies will do his duty, Clara, but his methods are like a plough in a flower-bed, effective, but crude. We must continue our own inquiries, for I suspect the truth lies closer to home." Her thoughts turned to the letters from Charles. Haverford, accusing Sir Reginald of financial mismanagement, and the vial with its chemical scent, so like that of Captain Warrender's cigarette case. The ledger's entry of a payment to L.C. suggested Lionel Cresswell's involvement, and Diana Trent's bitterness toward Eleanor hinted at a personal motive. The locket, with its photograph of Charles, pointed to a past that still cast shadows over the present. Miss Marple resolved to probe deeper into these connections, starting with a conversation she had been postponing. "Clara," she said, rising, "I should like to speak with Mr. Cresswell alone. His role in the family's affairs may shed light on matters." They found the solicitor in the morning-room, poring over papers with a frown. His sharp features tightened as Miss Marple approached, her demeanour as unassuming as ever. "Mr. Cresswell," she began, her voice gentle but probing, "I understand you advise Sir Reginald on financial matters. The ledger in the estate office mentions a substantial payment to L.C. last week. Might I ask what it was for?" Cresswell's pen froze, and he looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Miss Marple, those are private matters. The payment was for legal services, routine estate business. Surely you don't think it's connected to Eleanor's disappearance?" Miss Marple's smile was disarming. "I think only that everything may be connected, Mr. Cresswell. Lady Eleanor was seen near the estate office, and a key found in the conservatory fits its desk. Had she perhaps discovered something troubling in those papers?" Cresswell's face paled, but he recovered quickly. Eleanor had no interest in estate affairs. She was flighty, preoccupied with her engagement. If she was in the office, it was likely to fetch something trivial, a pen, perhaps. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes noting the slight tremor in his hand. Of course, and yet her locket was found in the garden near the conservatory door. Curious place for a trivial errand, don't you think? Cresswell's lips thinned, but he said nothing more, excusing himself with a curt nod. As he left, Clara whispered, "Jane, he's hiding something, isn't he?" "Undoubtedly," Miss Marple replied, her tone thoughtful. "But what and why? We must look further." Her next inquiry led her to the servants' quarters, where she sought out Sarah, the housemaid, who had seen Eleanor take the back staircase. Sarah was polishing silver in the pantry, her hands moving nervously as Miss Marple approached. "Sarah, Miss Marple said kindly, "You mentioned Lady Eleanor going toward the conservatory. Did you see anyone else near the back staircase that evening?" Sarah hesitated, her eyes darting to the door. "Well, miss, I didn't want to speak out of turn, but I saw Miss Trent near the staircase, just after Lady Eleanor went down. She looked upset, like she'd been crying. I thought she was following her cousin." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Crying, you say? And did she go down the stairs?" "I couldn't say, miss. I went back to my work. But she was holding something, a letter, I think. It was crumpled in her hand. A letter." Miss Marple's mind raced, recalling the bundle of letters in the estate office. Had Diana found one, or written one? The web was tightening, but the centre remained elusive. Returning to the library, Miss Marple was approached by Inspector Davies, who looked harried but determined. "Miss Marple," he said, "Mrs. Bantry tells me you've been asking questions. Found anything useful?" Miss Marple's smile was modest. "Only small things, Inspector. A locket, a key, a few inconsistencies. But I wonder, have your men searched the estate office? There may be papers worth examining." Davies frowned but nodded. "I'll have it looked into. We've found nothing in the gardens yet, but there's a faint trail of footprints leading to the rose trellis. Small, like a woman's. Could be Eleanor's." Miss Marple's expression remained serene, but her heart quickened. The footprints, the locket, the blood, all pointed to the conservatory and the garden beyond. But the letters and the vial suggested a motive deeper than a lover's quarrel or a family spat. "Thank you, Inspector," she said. "I shall continue to observe." As Davies left, Miss Marple turned to Clara. "We must watch Miss Trent closely, Clara. Her tears and her letter suggests a secret, perhaps one she shared with Eleanor. And I think it time we examined Captain Warrender's spare cigarette case. Its contents may tell us more than he does." The morning wore on, and Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her needles a steady rhythm against the growing tension. The lies were surfacing like ripples on a pond, and she knew that beneath them lay the truth about Lady Eleanor's fate. She would wait and watch and listen, for the smallest slip could unravel everything. Chapter 8. The emotional turning point. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the tall windows of Haverford Hall, but the air within remained heavy with suspicion and dread. Inspector Davies and his men moved methodically through the estate, their boots echoing in the corridors, while the guests, confined to the drawing-room, grew increasingly restless. Miss Jane Marple, however, sat quietly in the library, her knitting needles still, her mind a whirl of connections. The clues, a hairpin, the scrap of emerald satin, the brass key, the cigarette case, the drop of blood, the locket, the letters, and the mysterious vial were like pieces of a delicate mosaic, and she sensed they were nearing a critical juncture. Mrs. Clara Bantry, her face pale with exhaustion, joined Miss Marple, her voice low. "Jane, the inspector's men found nothing new in the estate office, but they're still searching the grounds. I can't bear this tension. Everyone's looking at each other as if they're guilty. Have you made any sense of it?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly, though her expression was grave. "Sense is emerging, Clara, but it is like a half-finished scar. One must see the pattern before it can be completed. I believe we are close to a revelation, but it will require a gentle push." Her thoughts lingered on Miss Diana Trent, whose tearful encounter near the back staircase, as reported by Sarah the housemaid, suggested a deeper involvement. The crumpled letter in Diana's hand, the bitterness in her voice when speaking of Eleanor, and her unrequited affection for Captain Warrender all pointed to a motive rooted in jealousy or betrayal. Yet the letters from Charles Haverford and the financial strain hinted at a broader conspiracy. Miss Marple resolved to confront Diana, sensing that her emotional fragility might yield the truth. She found Diana alone in the morning room, staring out at the gardens, her hands clasped tightly around a handkerchief. The young woman's face was drawn, her eyes red-rimmed, as if she had been crying again. Miss Marple approached with her usual gentle demeanour, her voice soft but insistent. "Miss Trent, I wonder if you might spare a moment. I am trying to understand what happened to your cousin, and I believe you know more than you have said." Diana's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with a mix of fear and defiance. "I've told you everything, Miss Marple. I spoke to Eleanor about the wedding, and that was all. Why do you keep questioning me?" Miss Marple sat opposite her, her gaze steady. "Because, my dear, you were seen near the back staircase, holding a letter, looking distressed, just after Eleanor went down. And because your feelings for Captain Warrender are no secret, a young woman's heart can lead her to act in ways she later regrets." Diana's composure cracked, her hands trembling as she pressed the handkerchief to her lips. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I loved Julian, yes, but I didn't harm Eleanor. I followed her that night. I wanted to talk to her, to make her see how wrong he was for her. She was so blind, so trusting." Miss Marple leaned forward, her tone gentle but probing. "And what happened when you followed her, Miss Trent? Did you see her in the conservatory?" Diana's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head, her voice barely audible. "I didn't get that far. I saw her go down the back staircase, and I started to follow, but then I heard a noise, like a door slamming, and I got frightened. I turned back. I swear I didn't see her again." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. "A noise, you say? From the conservatory or elsewhere?" "From the garden, I think," Diana said, her voice trembling. It was sharp, like something breaking. "I thought perhaps she'd dropped something, but I was too upset to go on. I went back to the ballroom and tried to forget it." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The noise Diana described could explain the broken locket, or perhaps the drop of blood in the conservatory. But her story, while emotional, left gaps. "And the letter you held, Miss Trent, what was it?" Diana's face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. "It was a letter from Julian," she sobbed. "He wrote it to me months ago, before. He proposed to Eleanor. He said he cared for me, that he wanted a future with me. But then he changed, and she took him from me. I showed it to her that night, hoping she'd see he wasn't true. She laughed, Miss Marple. She laughed and said I was pathetic." The confession hung in the air, raw and painful. Miss Marple's expression softened, but her mind was relentless. Diana's story confirmed her rivalry with Eleanor, but it also suggested that Eleanor had reached the conservatory alive, perhaps to meet someone or to confront them. The letter from Warrender added another layer, casting doubt on his loyalty and motives. "Thank you, Miss Trent," Miss Marple said gently. "You have been very brave. Rest now, and leave the rest to me." As Diana left, wiping her tears, Clara whispered, "Jane, do you believe her? She seems so broken." Miss Marple's needles resumed their clicking, a steady rhythm against the chaos. "I believe she told us part of the truth, Clara, but there is more she has not said. Perhaps because she does not yet know it herself. The noise she heard, the letter, the locket all point to a moment of conflict in the garden. We must now consider Captain Warrender's role more closely. His cigarette case, with its strange scent, troubles me. She rose, her small frame resolute. Let us find Inspector Davies. Clara, I wish to know if his men have examined the garden path near the rose trellis. And I think it time we asked Captain Warrender about that letter to Miss Trent. As they stepped into the hall, the weight of Diana's confession lingered. A turning point that had cracked the facade of Haverford Hall's glittering society. Miss Marple knew the truth was near, but it was tangled in a web of lies that required one final, careful tug to unravel. Chapter 9. The trap. The mid-morning light streamed through the tall windows of Haverford Hall, illuminating the library where Miss Jane Marple sat, her knitting needles moving with a deceptive calm. The house buzzed with the activity of Inspector Davies' men, who were combing the grounds and questioning the servants. But Miss Marple's focus remained on the human threads of the mystery. The clues: the tortoiseshell hairpin, the scrap of emerald satin, the brass key, the silver cigarette case, the drop of blood, the locket, the letters from Charles Haverford, and the vial with its chemical scent, had woven a complex web. Diana Trent's tearful confession had been a turning point, revealing a rift with Eleanor and a letter from Captain Warrender. But Miss Marple knew the truth required one final push to emerge. Mrs. Clara Bantry, her nerves frayed, but her trust in Miss Marple unshaken, whispered Jane. Diana's story was heartbreaking, but does it bring us closer to finding Eleanor? The inspector seems convinced she's run off with someone. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with quiet determination. The inspector sees only the surface, Clara, but the surface is disturbed by ripples, and those ripples point to a deeper truth. I believe it is time to gather our suspects and apply a little pressure. The guilty will betray themselves if we are watchful. She requested Sir Reginald to assemble the key figures: Captain Warrender, Miss Diana Trent, Lady Margaret, Dr. Alistair Gray, and Mr. Lionel Cresswell in the drawing-room. Inspector Davies, intrigued by Miss Marple's reputation, agreed to observe, though his scepticism was evident. As the group gathered, their faces a mixture of wariness, suspicion, and unease. Miss Marple stood, her small figure commanding the room with an authority that belied her unassuming appearance. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and measured, "we are faced with a most distressing puzzle: the disappearance of Lady Eleanor Haverford. I have no wish to distress you further, but I believe that by examining certain details, we may uncover the truth. Let us consider the events of last night." She held up the brass key, its gleam catching the light. This key, found in the conservatory, unlocked a drawer in the estate office containing letters from Sir Reginald's late brother, Charles, and a vial of a chemical substance. The letters speak of financial disputes, and the vial's scent matches that of Captain Warrender's cigarette case, which was curiously empty. Warrender's face tightened, but he remained silent. Miss Marple continued, her gaze sweeping the room. A scrap of Lady Eleanor's gown was found in the conservatory door, and a drop of blood nearby suggests she was there, perhaps in distress. Her locket, with a photograph of Charles Haverford, was found by the rose trellis, its chain broken as if torn off in a struggle. Lady Margaret stifled a sob, and Diana's hands clenched in her lap. Miss Marple's tone softened, but her words were precise. "Miss Trent, you told me you followed Eleanor to the back staircase after a heated exchange about a letter from Captain Warrender. You heard a noise, like something breaking, and turned back. That noise, I believe, was the locket's chain snapping." Diana's eyes widened, but she said nothing. Miss Marple turned to Warrender. Captain, you claim you waited on the terrace, smoking a cigarette, but your case was empty. And you mentioned a spare. Yet a chemical scent in your case suggests you carried something other than tobacco. Perhaps something from the estate office. Voice was sharp. This is absurd, Miss Marple. I have no idea what you're implying. I loved Eleanor Shea was to be my wife. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Love is a powerful motive, Captain, but so is fear. Fear of exposure, perhaps, of secrets you wished to keep hidden. She turned to the group, her voice steady. I propose a small experiment. Let us return to the conservatory, where I believe Lady Eleanor met someone last night. I have asked Inspector Davies to have his men bring an item from the estate officer, small safe, which I suspect this key may also fit. The group, tense and murmuring, followed Miss Marple to the conservatory, where the air was thick with the scent of jasmine. Inspector Davies' men carried in a small, locked safe, found in a cupboard in the estate office. Miss Marple produced the brass key and, with a click, opened it. Inside was a single documenta codicil to Charles Haverford's will, dated a month before his death, bequeathing a significant portion of the estate to Eleanor. Bypassing Sir Reginald, a gasp rippled through the room. Sir Reginald's face drained of colour, and Cresswell's pen fell from his hand. Miss Marple's voice was calm but unrelenting. This codicil, I believe, was what Lady Eleanor discovered. It threatened someone's plans. Perhaps someone who needed the estate's wealth to cover debts or secure a future. Cresswell stammered, "This is preposterous. I knew nothing of this codicil." Miss Marple's gaze was piercing. "Yet you were paid a large sum by Sir Reginald last week. Mr. Cresswell and you, Sir Reginald, were seen arguing with Eleanor before 9. Did she confront you about this?" Sir Reginald's voice was hoarse. She asked about Charles's will. I told her it was settled years ago. I didn't know about this codicil." The room was electric with tension. Dr. Gray stepped forward, his voice steady. "Miss Marple, if Eleanor came to me a week ago, asking about a chemical she'd found in the estate office. She thought it might be dangerous. I tested. It's a sedative, strong enough to incapacitate if ingested." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes on Warrendor. "And the vial in the desk, Captain, matches the scent in your cigarette case. Did you perhaps use it to ensure Eleanor's silence?" Warrender's face contorted, and he lunged forward, but Inspector Davies restrained him. "This is nonsense," he shouted. "I didn't touch her." Miss Marple's voice cut through the chaos. "Then let us see who flinches. Captain, the truth is near, and someone in this room knows where Lady Eleanor is." The trap was set, and as the group exchanged glances, Miss Marple watched, her sharp eyes catching every flicker of fear, every subtle shift. The web of lies was unraveling, and she knew the guilty party would soon betray themselves. Chapter 10. The revealed the conservatory of Haverford Hall. With its glass walls and heavy scent of jasmine, was a stage set for revelation. The morning sun cast stark light on the gathered suspects: Captain Julian Warrender, Miss Diana Trent, Lady Margaret, Sir Reginald, Dr. Alistair Gray, and Mr. Lionel Cresswell, each face taut with anticipation or dread. Inspector Davies stood by the door, his notebook ready, while Mrs. Clara Bantry hovered near Miss Jane Marple, whose small figure radiated quiet authority. The clues: the hairpin, the scrap of satin, the brass key, the cigarette case, the drop of blood, the locket, the letters, the vial, and the codicil had led to this moment, and Miss Marple was ready to unravel the web of lies. "Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Marple began, her voice clear and measured. "We have been entangled in a most intricate puzzle, the disappearance of Lady Eleanor Haverford. But puzzles, however complex, have solutions, and the solution lies in the details we have uncovered. Let us reconstruct the truth, step by step." She held up the brass key, its gleam catching the light. This key unlocked a drawer in the estate office, revealing letters from Charles Haverford, accusing Sir Reginald of financial mismanagement, and a vial of sedative, confirmed by Dr. Gray to be potent enough to incapacitate. The same scent was found in Captain Warrender's cigarette case, which was curiously empty despite his claim of smoking on the terrace. Warrender's jaw tightened, but Miss Marple continued, her gaze sweeping the room. A scrap of Eleanor's gown was caught in the conservatory door, a drop of blood was found nearby, and her locket, with a photograph of Charles Haverford, lay by the rose trellis, its chain broken. These suggest Eleanor came here, perhaps in distress, but why? She turned to Diana Trent, whose pale face betrayed her nerves. "Miss Trent, you admitted following Eleanor to the back staircase after a quarrel about a letter from Captain Warrender. Professing his love for you, you heard a noise, like something breaking, and turned back. That noise, I believe, was the locket's chain snapping in a struggle." Diana's eyes filled with tears, but Miss Marple's tone remained steady. "The codicil we found in the safe, bequeathing part of the estate to Eleanor, was a motive. Someone feared its discovery would ruin their plans. But who?" She paused, her eyes locking on Sir Reginald, whose face was ashen. "Sir Reginald, you argued with Eleanor before 9 about Charles's will. You claimed ignorance of the codicil. But the ledger shows a large payment to Mr. Cresswell, marked L.C., suggesting you sought to suppress it. Eleanor, I suspect, found the codicil and confronted you." Sir Reginald stammered, I didn't harm her. She asked about Charles. Yes, but I told her it was settled." Miss Marple's gaze shifted to Cresswell, whose sharp features were drawn tight. "Mr. Cresswell, your financial dealings with Sir Reginald were urgent, conducted during a gala. Did Eleanor discover your role in hiding the codicil, perhaps threatening to expose you?" Cresswell's voice was shrill. "This is outrageous. I handled routine estate matters, nothing more." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Yet the vial of sedative tells a different story. Dr. Gray, you identified it as a drug capable of rendering someone unconscious. Captain Warrender, your cigarette case carried its scent. Did you use it to subdue Eleanor, perhaps to protect a secret?" Warrender lunged forward, his voice hoarse. "I loved her. I'd never hurt her." Miss Marple raised a hand, silencing him. "Love, Captain, can be a mask for darker motives. But I believe the truth lies not with one person, but with a conspiracy. Let me explain." She paced slowly, her voice deliberate. "Eleanor discovered the codicil, which threatened Sir Reginald's control of the estate and Mr. Cresswell's lucrative position. She went to the estate office to confirm her suspicions, using the brass key. There, she found the vial, perhaps recognizing its danger. She confronted someone, likely Mr. Cresswell, who was seen arguing with Sir Reginald. A struggle ensued, and Eleanor fled to the conservatory, where the scrap of her gown was caught. The drop of blood suggests a minor injury, perhaps from a fall or a blow." She turned to Dr. Gray. "Dr. Gray, your calm observation of the blood and your knowledge of the sedative suggest you were consulted after the fact. Did you help conceal what happened?" Dr. Gray's face remained impassive, but his hands clenched. "I examined the blood as you asked, Miss Marple. I know nothing more." Miss Marple's smile was faint. "I think you do. You see, Eleanor is not dead. She is hidden. The locket's broken chain and the footprints in the garden suggest she was taken, alive but sedated, to a place where she could be kept silent. The attic, perhaps, or a locked room in the east wing, which the servants rarely enter." A gasp rippled through the room. Lady Margaret cried out, "Alive! Oh, please, where is she?" Miss Marple's voice was firm. "Inspector Davies, I suggest you search the east wing, particularly the old guest suite, which has a lock matching this key. I believe you will find Eleanor there, sedated but unharmed, hidden by Mr. Cresswell and Dr. Gray, with Sir Reginald's reluctant consent to prevent her from revealing the codicil." Cresswell's face contorted, and he bolted for the door, but Inspector Davies' men seized him. Dr. Gray's shoulders slumped, and he murmured it was to protect the family. She would have ruined everything. Sir Reginald sank into a chair, his voice broken. "I didn't want this. I only wanted to save the estate." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her tone was resolute. "The truth, Sir Reginald, cannot be hidden forever. Eleanor's discovery threatened your legacy, but your actions have cost you more." As Inspector Davies' men rushed to the east wing, Miss Marple stepped back, her work done. The web of lies had been unravelled, and the truth, though painful, was laid bare. Chapter 11. The Reflection, the Conservatory of Haverford Hall. So recently a stage 4 confrontation now held a quieter air as the midday sun filtered through its glass panes. The revelation of Lady Eleanor Haverford's fate had left the household in a state of stunned relief and lingering shame. Inspector Davies' men had found Eleanor in the East Wing's old guest suite, sedated but alive, locked in a room with a window boarded shut. Dr. Alistair Gray had administered a mild antidote, and Eleanor, pale but recovering, was now resting under her mother's tearful care. Mr. Lionel Cresswell had been taken into custody, his protests drowned out by the weight of evidence, while Dr. Gray, his complicity confirmed, awaited questioning. Sir Reginald, broken by his own role in the affair, had retreated to his study, unable to face his guests. Miss Jane Marple sat in the library. Her knitting resumed, the soft click of her needles a steady counterpoint to the murmurs of the household. Mrs. Clara Bantry, her face a mixture of awe and exhaustion, sat beside her, clutching a cup of tea. "Jane, you were marvellous," she said, her voice hushed with admiration. "To think Eleanor was here all along, hidden away. But how did you know? And why did they do it?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression was tinged with sadness. "People, Clara, are predictable in their weaknesses. Greed, fear, and pride, these are the threads that bind most crimes. The codicil to Charles Haverford's will was a threat to Sir Reginald's legacy and Mr. Cresswell's profits. They could not allow Eleanor to reveal it, so they concocted a plan to silence her, using Dr. Gray's medical knowledge to keep her sedated until they could devise a more permanent solution. Clara shuddered. But to hide her in the house, under everyone's noses, it's monstrous. Miss Marple nodded, her needles pausing. Monstrous, yes, but also desperate. They underestimated Eleanor's determination to uncover the truth, just as they underestimated the power of small details. The hairpin, the scrap of satin, the locket, these were not mere accidents. They told a story of a young woman who stumbled upon a secret and paid a price for it. She leaned back, her gaze distant. In my village, Clara, I have seen such things before. A quarrel over a will, a hidden grudge, a moment of panic, they lead to acts one would never imagine. Mr. Cresswell, driven by greed, saw the codicil as a threat to his influence over the estate. Sir Reginald, weakened by debt, feared ruin. Dr. Gray, bound by loyalty to the family, was persuaded to assist. And Captain Warrender, though not the mastermind, played his part with his sedative-laced cigarette case, perhaps hoping to secure his future with Eleanor's wealth. Clara's eyes widened. Captain Warrender, but he seemed so devoted. Miss Marple's smile was faint. Devotion, Clara, can be a mask. His letter to Miss Trent revealed his inconstancy, and the chemical scent in his cigarette case suggested he knew of the sedative. He may not have intended harm, but he was complicit in the plan to keep Eleanor silent. Miss Trent's jealousy, though painful, was a distraction, a red herring, as it were. Clara shook her head, marveling. You saw it all, Jane, when the rest of us were blind. But what happens now? Will Eleanor be all right? Physically, yes, Miss Marple said softly. Dr. Gray's antidote was effective, and she is young and strong. But her heart will take longer to heal. To be betrayed by her father, her fiancé, and her family's trusted advisors is a wound that cuts deep. Yet she is a Haverford, and they are a resilient lot. She set her knitting aside, her hands folding neatly in her lap. As for me, Clara, my work here is done. Inspector Davies has the evidence he needs, and the truth is laid bare. I shall return to St. Mary Mead, where my roses need tending, and my neighbours will no doubt have their own small dramas to share. Clara laughed, though her eyes were misty. You make it sound so simple, Jane. But you've saved a life and uncovered a conspiracy. Surely you'll stay for a little praise. Miss Marple's smile was modest. Praise is like a loud bell. Claret draws attention, but serves no purpose. I prefer the quiet satisfaction of seeing things set right. Now, let us have one last cup of tea before I go. I suspect the train to St. Mary Mead will not wait. As the two women sipped their tea, the library seemed to exhale, its shadows softening in the light of truth. Miss Marple's mind, ever active, lingered on the case, not with pride, but with a quiet reflection on the frailty of human nature. The web of lies had been unravelled, and though the scars remained, Haverford Hall might yet find peace. With a final click of her needles, Miss Marple prepared to leave, her work done, her wisdom a silent gift to those she left behind. Chapter 12. The threads of truth, the afternoon light, bathed Haverford Hall in a golden glow, softening the stark edges of the previous night's drama. The household, though still reeling from the revelation of Lady Eleanor Haverford's ordeal, was beginning to settle into a fragile calm. Eleanor now awake and under the careful watch of her mother. Lady Margaret was recovering in her room, her strength returning with each passing hour. Mr. Lionel Cresswell remained in custody, his protestations of innocence drowned out by the damning evidence of the codicil and the sedative. Dr. Alistair Gray, his complicity exposed, had agreed to cooperate with Inspector Davies, while Sir Reginald faced the painful task of confronting his own role in the conspiracy. Captain Julian Warrender, his charm tarnished, had retreated to his quarters, his future uncertain. Miss Jane Marple sat in the drawing-room, her knitting a quiet companion as she sipped tea with Mrs. Clara Bantry. The room, with its elegant furnishings and lingering scent of roses, seemed a world apart from the secrets it had harboured. Clara, her earlier agitation replaced by a mixture of relief and curiosity, leaned forward. Jane, it's a miracle Eleanor is safe. but I still can't quite believe it. How did you piece it all together, and what happens now, Miss Marple? Needles clicked softly, her eyes thoughtful. The pieces, Clara, were like threads in a badly knitted scarf, tangled but not impossible to unravel. The hairpin in Eleanor's room, out of place in her tidy habits, suggested haste. The scrap of her gown in the conservatory door told of a struggle, and the drop of blood confirmed it was no mere flight of fancy. The locket, with its photograph of Charles Haverford, pointed to a motive rooted in the past, while the brass key and the codicil revealed the stakes a legacy worth hiding. She paused, her gaze distant, the vial of sedative matching the scent in Captain Warrender's cigarette case was the link that tied it all together. Mr. Cresswell, fearing the loss of his influence, devised the plan to silence Eleanor. Dr. Gray, bound by loyalty and perhaps his own financial dependence, provided the means. Sir Reginald, desperate to save the estate, turned a blind eye, though I believe his heart was heavy with guilt. Captain Warrender, swayed by promises of wealth, played his part, though his love for Eleanor may have been genuine in its twisted way. Clara shook her head, marvelling. And Miss Trent? Was she truly innocent? Miss Marple's smile was gentle. Innocent of the crime, yes, but not of emotion. Her jealousy and her confrontation with Eleanor set the stage, though she did not know it. Her letter from Warrender was a catalyst, pushing Eleanor to seek the truth about the codicil. In a way, Diana's pain helped uncover the plot, though it cost her dearly. Clara sighed, setting down her teacup. Poor Diana, and poor Eleanor, to be betrayed by those she trusted. Will she ever forgive her father? Miss Marple's expression softened, but her voice was firm. Forgiveness is a journey, Clara, not a destination. Eleanor is young, and her spirit is strong. She will find her way, though it may take time. As for Sir Reginald, he must face the consequences of his choices, not just the law, but the loss of his daughter's trust. That, I suspect, will be his heaviest burden. She set her knitting aside, her hands folding neatly in her lap. In St. Mary Mead, I have seen such dramas play out on a smaller scale: a disputed will, a hidden secret, a moment of weakness. Human nature does not change, whether in a village or a grand estate. We are all capable of great good and great folly, and it is in understanding that folly that we find the truth. Clara's eyes were misty. You make it sound so simple, Jane, yet you've done something extraordinary. You've given Eleanor back her life, and the Haverfords a chance to heal. Miss Marple's smile was modest. I have only observed, Clara, and listened to what the clues had to say. The truth was there, waiting to be seen. Now, I must prepare for my train. My garden will not tend itself, and I dare say my neighbours will have their own tales to tell. As they rose, Inspector Davies entered, his face a mixture of respect and bemusement. Miss Marple, I've just spoken with Eleanor. She's confirmed much of your theory. She found the codicil and confronted Cresswell, who panicked and used the sedative. You saved us weeks of work. I don't suppose you'd consider joining the force. Miss Marple laughed softly, a rare sound that warmed the room. Oh, Inspector, I am far too fond of my roses for that. But I am glad to have been of service. Keep an eye on Captain Warrender. He may yet have more to tell. With a final nod, Miss Marple gathered her knitting and her reticule. With a small cloister hairpin, the locket, the key still rested, their work done. As she and Clara walked toward the hall, the weight of the case lifted, leaving only the quiet satisfaction of a puzzle solved. Haverford Hall would bear its scars, But the truth, like sunlight, had a way of healing what it touched. Chapter 13. The Unravelling of the Web. Must confess that as I sat in the grand drawing-room of Harrington Manor that fateful evening, my heart pounded with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The air was thick with tension, the kind that hangs over a gathering where secrets are about to be laid bare. The snow outside had ceased its relentless fall, but the chill seemed to have seeped into the very bones of the house. Or perhaps it was merely the atmosphere created by the events of the past few days. Poirot had assembled us all, every soul under that roof, who had been present on the night of Sir Basil Harrington's tragic demise. He had been insistent, almost imperious, in his summons, and none dared refuse. The room itself was a testament to the opulence of high society, with its polished mahogany panels, crystal chandeliers casting a soft, flickering light from the candles, for the electricity had failed again due to the storm, and heavy velvet drapes drawn against the night. Lady Evelyn Harrington occupied the her-backed armchair by the fire, her face pale and drawn, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as if to steady herself. Beside her sat her son, Gerald, his usual air of nonchalance replaced by a furtive restlessness. He fidgeted with his cufflinks, avoiding everyone's gaze. Miss Louise Bourget, Gerald's fiancée, perched on the edge of a settee, her delicate features composed into an expression of serene innocence, though I noted the slight tremor in her fingers as she smoothed her skirt. Mr. Victor Renard, the business associate, lounged in a corner chair with affected ease, puffing on a cigarette, while Mrs. Lydia Allerton, the family friend, knitted quietly in her seat, her needles clicking like the ticking of a clock counting down to doom. The butler, Graves, stood discreetly by the door, his posture ramrod straight, and even the maid, Elsie, had been called in, hovering nervously near the servants' entrance. Inspector Japp, who had arrived earlier that day to oversee what he termed the formalities, paced impatiently near the window. "I say, Poirot," he grumbled, "this had better be worth the wait. We've got statements, alibis solid as rock, some of them. If you're going to pull a rabbit out of the hat, now's the time." Poirot, seated in the center of the room like a conductor, before his orchestra, adjusted his impeccable mustache with a delicate touch. His eyes, those keen, green, cat-like eyes, swept over the assembly with a calm that bordered on the serene. He was the picture of composure, his small, neat frame enveloped in a perfectly tailored suit, his patent leather shoes gleaming even in the dim light. "Patience, mon ami Japp," he replied in his precise, accented voice. "The little grey cells. They do not hurry, but they arrive always at the truth. And tonight, mesdames et messieurs, the truth shall be revealed. For in this house of high society, a web of lies has been spun, a web most intricate, but one that Hercule Poirot shall unravel thread by thread." I, Captain Arthur Hastings, sat beside him, my notebook at the ready, though I scarcely knew what to expect. Over the preceding days, Poirot had confided little to me, save for cryptic remarks about the psychology of the human heart and the significance of the insignificant. I had witnessed his meticulous examinations, the scrutiny of the medicine bottle from Sir Basil's bedside table, the careful measurement of the distance from the study to the guest rooms, the questioning about the faint scent of almond that lingered in the air after the poisoning cyanide. The doctor had confirmed Sir Basil had collapsed in agony during the after-dinner gathering, clutching his throat, his face contorted in a grimace of pain. The port glass from which he had sipped lay shattered on the floor, but tests had shown the poison was not in the decanter shared by all, but administered somehow directly to him perhaps in his personal medicine dropper, which he used discreetly for his indigestion. Poirot cleared his throat, commanding instant silence. "Let us begin at the beginning, if you please. Sir Basil Harrington, a man of wealth and influence, invites a select circle to his manor for what he calls a weekend of reconciliation. But beneath the politeness, the elegant dinners, the games of bridge, there simmers a cauldron of motives. Lady Harrington, you who have endured a marriage of convenience, yet one strained by your husband's indiscretions, Gerald, the son who chafes under his father's disapproval, burdened by debts that Sir Basil refused to settle. Miss Bougette, the charming fiancée, whose past is not quite as spotless as it appears. Mr. Renard, the partner whose business dealings with Sir Basil had turned sour over a disputed contract worth thousands. Mrs. Allerton, the old friend who harboured a grudge from years past, when Sir Basil's testimony ruined her late husband's reputation. Even you, Graves, the loyal butler, who had been accused unjustly, perhaps of pilfering from the wine cellar. A murmur rippled through the room. Lady Harrington's eyes flashed with indignation. "This is outrageous, Monsieur Poirot. Are you accusing us all?" "Not all, Madame," Poirot replied smoothly. "But each of you has lied small lies, perhaps to protect yourselves, but lies that form the web. Consider the alibis. At 8 o'clock, when Sir Basil took his fatal sip, all were in the drawing-room. But the poison, cyanide, acts swiftly yet. Sir Basil had complained of a bitter taste in his medicine earlier that afternoon, administered in his study. Who had access to that medicine dropper? Who knew of his habit?" He turned his gaze to Gerald. "You, monsieur, claim to be in the billiard-room from 4 to 6, alone. But Elsie here saw you near the study at 5:30, did she not?" The maid nodded timidly, her cheeks flushing. Gerald stiffened. I went to fetch a book. Nothing more. Ah, but the book, a volume on poisons, curiously misplaced from the library shelf. A red herring, perhaps, or a clue to your desperation." Poirot's voice was gentle, almost pitying. Then, to my surprise, he shifted to Miss Bougette. "And you, mademoiselle, so composed, so devoted to your fiancé." But Poirot observes the details. "The new handkerchief you carried the day after the murder, replacing one that was ... stained. A drop of liquid, perhaps, from handling the cyanide vial. And your alibi for the afternoon, you said you were walking in the garden. But the mud on your shoes was from the path near the greenhouse, where cyanide is kept for pest control. Locked, yes, but the key was missing, found later in your jewelry. Box, disguised as a pendant chain." Miss Bougette's face drained of colour. "That's absurd. I ... I have no motive." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "Ah, but you do, mademoiselle." Poirot has inquired discreetly. "Of course, your real name is not Bourget, but Beaumont. Louise Beaumont, daughter of Elise Beaumont, who was Sir Basil's mistress 20 years ago, abandoned and left destitute when he cast her aside. She died in poverty, and you, raised in secrecy, vowed revenge. You insinuated yourself into Gerald's life, planning to marry into the family only to strike at its heart. The engagement was your means, the poison your weapon. You switched to medicine in the study that afternoon, using gloves to avoid prints, but a single drop betrayed you on the handkerchief, which you discarded, and the psychological clue, the way you watched Sir Basil during dinner, with eyes, not of affection, but of cold calculation. The little grey cells, they perceive such things. A gasp escaped Lady Harrington. Gerald stared at his fiancée in horror. Louise, is this true? Miss Burgett's composure cracked at last. She buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. He ruined my mother. ... Left us to starve. I had to make him pay. Inspector Japp stepped forward, handcuffs at the ready. Well, I'll be dashed, Poirot. You've done it again. Poirot raised a hand. But wait, there is more. The web extends, Gerald. You suspected, did you not? That is why you lied about the book, to protect her. And Lady Harrington, your affair with Mr. Renard provided a convenient distraction, but you are innocent of the crime. As Miss Bourget was led away, the room fell into a stunned silence. I marvelled at Poirot's genius, how he had pieced together the fragments, the genealogy records he had wired for, the chemical analysis of the handkerchief, the inconsistencies in timings that no one else had noted. It was logical, inevitable, yet shocking in its revelation. Poirot rose, adjusting his coat. The human mind, it weaves such intricate deceptions, but truth, it is like the sun, it pierces all shadows. Yet, as we prepared to depart, I sensed there was one final thread to untangle, a reflection on the frailty of the soul that Poirot so often pondered. The night was not yet over. Chapter 14. The final threads, the aftermath of Miss Louise Burgett's confession, hung over Harrington Manor like a fog that refused to lift. The drawing-room, once a stage for Poirot's dramatic revelation, now felt oppressively silent, as though the very walls recoiled from the truth they had witnessed. The chandeliers still flickered with their soft candlelight, but the warmth had fled, leaving only a brittle chill in the air. Inspector Japp had escorted Miss Bourget to the awaiting police car outside, her wrists bound by handcuffs, her face a mask of resignation tinged with defiance. The snow had begun to fall again, soft flakes drifting past the tall windows, sealing the manor in its isolation once more. Captain Arthur Hastings sat near the fire, his notebook lying forgotten on his lap. The events of the evening had left him shaken not by the crime itself, for he had seen Poirot unravel many such mysteries, but by the sheer audacity of the young woman who had played her part so convincingly. He glanced at Poirot, who stood by the mantelpiece, his small hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on some invisible point in the distance. The little Belgian detective seemed almost serene, yet there was a tightness about his mouth, a sign that his mind was still at work, weaving together the final threads of the case. The remaining occupants of the room were in disarray. Lady Evelyn Harrington, her composure shattered, had retired to her chambers, claiming a headache, though Hastings suspected it was more a need to escape the accusing eyes of her son. Gerald sat slumped in an armchair, his face pale, his hands trembling as he clutched a glass of brandy. Mr. Victor Renard had excused himself to make a telephone call, though Hastings noted the man's hurried departure with suspicion had not entirely cleared him of secondary involvement. Mrs. Lydia Allerton continued her knitting, though her needles moved more slowly now, as if her thoughts were elsewhere. The butler, Graves, and the maid, Elsie, had been dismissed to their duties, but their absence did little to ease the tension. Poirot, Hastings ventured, breaking the silence, "You've done it again, old chap, but I confess, I'm still reeling. How did you know it was Miss Bourget Louise Beaumont, I mean from the start, and that handkerchief? It seems so small a thing to hinge a case upon." Poirot turned, his green eyes gleaming with that familiar spark of satisfaction. "Man, cher Hastings, the handkerchief was but one thread in the tapestry. It is not the clue itself that matters, but what it reveals about the human soul. The psychology. Miss Beaumont, she was careful, yes, but no one can be perfect in deception. The new handkerchief, purchased so hastily the day after the murder, betrayed her fear of discovery, and the key to the greenhouse, disguised as a pendant, such ingenuity, but also such arrogance. She believed herself invisible, but to Hercule Poirot, no detail is too small. He paced a few steps, his polished shoes clicking softly on the parquet floor. Consider Hastings, the timeline. Sir Basil complained of a bitter taste in his medicine at 4 o'clock, yet he did not die until 8. The poison was cyanide, swift and merciless, yet it was not in the port glass shared by all. No, it was in the medicine dropper, administered in the study. But who could approach Sir Basil without suspicion? Only someone he trusted, or someone he did not suspect. Miss Beaumont, as Gerald's fiancée, had access to the house, to its routines, to its secrets. She knew of the greenhouse, where cyanide was kept for the roses. She knew of Sir Basil's medicine, taken discreetly for his indigestion, and she knew how to play the part of the devoted fiancée while plotting her revenge. Hastings nodded, slowly piecing it together. But Gerald, he suspected something, didn't he? That's why he lied about being in the billiard room. Precisement, Poirot said, raising a finger. Gerald's lie was not to protect himself, but her. He saw her near the study, perhaps even glimpsed the vial or the dropper, and his love for her clouded his judgment. He could not bring himself to betray her, even as his father lay dying. It is the tragedy of the heart, Hastings, the loyalty that blinds. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. It was Inspector Japp, his face flushed from the cold outside. Poirot, I've got Miss Bourget settled in the car, and the local constabulary will take her to the station. But there's something bothering me. You mentioned Lady Harrington's affair with Renard. How does that fit? Was it just a distraction, or is there more to this web of yours? Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. The affair, mon ami, was a thread that complicated the pattern, but it was not the crime. Lady Harrington and Mr. Renard, they sought to protect their secret, and in doing so, they provided alibis for one another, alibis that were, shall we say, overly convenient. But their indiscretion did not extend to murder. No, the true motive lay in the past, in the shadow of Elise Beaumont's ruin. Miss Burgett's revenge was personal, precise, and cold. Japp scratched his chin, clearly impressed. You've got a way of making it all sound so simple, Poirot. But I'll wager you've got one more surprise up your sleeve. There's always one more with you. Poirot inclined his head, as if acknowledging a compliment. Perhaps, Japp, perhaps. But for now, let us say that the web is nearly unravelled. There remains only one small matter, a question of justice and of mercy. He turned to Gerald, who had been listening in silence, his eyes hollow. Monsieur Gerald, you loved her, did you not? And yet, you must face the truth. She used your affection, your trust, to gain entry to this house. What will you do now? Gerald's voice was barely a whisper. I don't know. I thought I knew her, but she was a stranger. All those stories about her childhood, her family, they were lies. And yet, I can't hate her. She lost everything because of my father. Poirot's expression softened, a rare glimpse of compassion. The heart, it is a fragile thing, monsieur. But you must rebuild. The truth, it sets free, even when it wounds. As Gerald rose and left the room, his shoulders slumped. Hastings felt a pang of sympathy. The young man had been caught in a web not of his own making, torn between love and betrayal. Poirot, too, seemed affected, though he quickly regained his composure. "Jap," Poirot said briskly, ensured that the evidence, the handkerchief, the key, the medicine bottle is properly catalogued. The courts will need precision, and Hercule Poirot does not deal in approximations. Jap chuckled. "Don't worry, Poirot. I'll dot the I's and cross the T's. You just keep those grey cells of yours in top form." As the inspector departed to oversee the formalities, Poirot turned to Hastings. "Come, mon ami. The night grows late, and this house has seen enough of tragedy. Let us prepare to leave. But first a moment to reflect. The order and method, they have prevailed, but the cost it is always the cost that lingers." They stepped out into the hall, where the grandfather clock ticked solemnly, marking the hour. The manor seemed to exhale, as if relieved of its burden of secrets. Yet Hastings knew that Poirot's mind was already turning to the next puzzle, the next web of lies waiting to be unravelled. Chapter 15. The quiet departure. The morning after the revelation at Harrington Manor dawned with a deceptive calm. The snow that had blanketed the estate for days had ceased, leaving a pristine, glittering landscape that belied the darkness of the events within. The sun, pale and tentative, cast long shadows across the frosted lawns, and the air was sharp with the promise of a thaw. Inside the manor, however, the atmosphere remained heavy, as if the walls themselves mourned the shattering of their carefully guarded secrets. Captain Arthur Hastings stood in the entrance hall, his suitcase packed and ready, watching as her Poirot adjusted his scarf with meticulous care before the grand mirror. The little Belgian detective was, as ever, the picture of precision, his overcoat buttoned just so, his hat tilted at the perfect angle, his moustache immaculate. Yet there was a quiet pensiveness in his demeanour, a softness in his green eyes that Hastings recognized as the aftermath of a case solved, not with triumph alone, but with an understanding of the frailties of the human heart. The household was subdued. Lady Evelyn Harrington had not emerged from her chambers, sending word through Graves, the butler, that she was indisposed. Gerald Harrington had left for London at first light, his face drawn and his manner distant, as though fleeing the manor might distance him from the betrayal of Louise Beaumont. Mr. Victor Renard had departed the previous evening. His business with the Harringtons concluded, though Hastings suspected the man's relief was tinged with unease at how narrowly he had escaped Poirot's scrutiny. Mrs. Lydia Allerton remained, her knitting needles silent now, her presence a quiet reminder of the tangled relationships that had unravelled. The servants moved about their tasks with hushed efficiency, as if fearful of disturbing the fragile peace. Inspector Japp had telephoned earlier to confirm that Miss Louise Beaumont, now under her true name, was safely in custody, awaiting trial. The evidence, meticulously gathered by Poirot, had been catalogued. The stained handkerchief, the greenhouse key disguised as a pendant, the medicine dropper laced with cyanide, and the genealogical records linking Louise to her tragic past. The case was airtight, Japp had declared, though he added with a chuckle, "Not that I'd expect anything less from you, Poirot." Now, as they prepared to leave, Hastings turned to his friend. "I say, Poirot, it's all wrapped up neatly, isn't it? Yet I can't help feeling there's something ... unfinished. The way Gerald looked, the way Lady Harrington shut herself awaitist, as if the truth has broken more than it's mended." Poirot nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You are perceptive, mon cher Hastings. The truth, it is a double-edged sword. It brings justice, but it also lays bare the wounds that lies conceal." This case, it was not merely about the murder of Sir Basil Harrington, but about the ripples of his actions, his cruelties, his indiscretions that spread through time to touch the lives of others. Louise Beaumont, she sought vengeance for her mother's ruin, but in doing so, she wove herself into the same web of destruction. It is the tragedy of revenge. Hastings, it consumes both the victim and the avenger. They stepped out into the crisp morning air, their breath visible. In the cold, the crunch of snow underfoot was the only sound as they made their way to the waiting car, its driver stamping his feet to keep warm. Poirot paused at the foot of the manor's grand steps, turning to gaze at the imposing Farcadet one last time. This house, he mused, it is beautiful, Nan, yet it holds such secrets, such pain. The high society, it wears a mask of elegance, but beneath, lies the chaos of the human soul. Hastings, ever the practical man, shifted his suitcase to his other hand. Do you think they'll recover, Poirot? The Harringtons, I mean. After all this, Poirot's eyes twinkled, though his smile was faint. Recovery, it is possible, but it requires courage. Lady Evelyn, she must face her own complicity in the family's discord. Gerald, he must learn to trust again, to build a life beyond the shadow of his father's legacy. They have the means, the position, but the heart, that is where the true work lies. For Hercule Poirot, the case is closed, but for them, the journey is just beginning. As they settled into the car, the driver starting the engine with a low rumble, Hastings ventured one final question. What about you, Poirot? You've solved another puzzle, but you seem quieter than usual. Does it ever weigh on you, all this probing into people's lives? Poirot leaned back, his gloved hands folded neatly in his lap. It is the burden of the little grey cells, mon ami. To see the truth is a gift, but it is also a responsibility. I, Hercule Poirot, do not solve crimes for glory, but for order, for the restoration of balance. Yet each case, it leaves its mark. The lies, the motives, the pain, they remind me that the human mind is both marvelous and fragile. And so, I reflect, I tidy my thoughts, and I move forward. There will always be another mystery, another web to unravel. The car pulled away, the manor receding into the distance, its turrets and gables swallowed by the snow-dusted trees. Hastings watched it fade, his mind turning over the events of the past days, the poison medicine, the hidden key, the bitter taste of betrayal. Poirot, beside him, closed his eyes, perhaps savouring the quiet or already contemplating the next challenge. The road stretched ahead, leading them back to London, to the familiar rhythm of their lives. As the countryside rolled past, Hastings felt a sense of closure, tempered by the lingering echoes of the case. Poirot had, as always, brought clarity to chaos, his logic cutting through the fog of deception like a beacon. Yet the cost of that clarity, the broken hearts, the shattered illusions, it was, Hastings thought, the price of truth, and one that Poirot bore with quiet dignity. The car rounded a bend, and Harrington Manor vanished from view. The mystery was solved, the web unravelled, and Hercule Poirot, the master of order and method, was already looking to the horizon. Word count 1057.